All right, next is, we're moving to new business, our tentative budget for 2014-15.
So the Facilities Advisory, or Finance Advisory Council met on this last week. Tim McGinnis updated the assumptions, and I'll let him go through that. Again, the proposed course of action with that, the board review this from now till July, approve the temporary budget in July, and then we'll have a formal budget hearing in September.
The budget for next year, a total of $32 million in revenue. That includes $6.5 million in revenue in the capital projects fund. What we're doing is we're transferring money that is in working cash from the $8.9 million. We're transferring $6.5 million out of working cash and into the capital projects fund. That becomes an expenditure in the working cash fund and then a revenue in the capital projects fund. And then as we expend the money on the various projects that we have next year, then those will be the expenditures in the capital projects fund. So the $32 million includes the $6.5 million in revenue for the capital projects fund. The total expenditures are $39 million, and obviously the reason that's so much higher than the projected revenue is because of those expenditures on the capital projects that we're going to be doing. With regard to the stadium, you know, the discussions we've had about parking, you know, the track, all those different expenditures that we're looking at possibly for next year.
Tim, from the standpoint of the district taxpayers, the overall amounts of money collected from property tax is actually going to go down because of the debt that we paid off, and so therefore that levy was not.
Correct. The total dollars collected is going to decrease because we've paid off the working
Just
cash
under $1
bonds.
million, right?
Yes. And we do have some decreases in the building bond payments also for next year. The $6.5 million is obviously not going to impact.
That's going to be taken
taxpayers.
from our fund balance, not from taxpayers' pockets.
Correct.
All right, so right now, the board has just gotten this budget. In July, we'll start doing a little bit more deeper dive on this and asking questions, right? Is that what you're looking for? Or?
Whatever the board would like. I mean, I can go
I
through
think
the
you should go
assumptions.
through the assumptions.
Yeah.
And since you talked about the 6.5 as you go through, could you say why that number was picked,
Okay.
please?
Overall, not including the capital projects, this budget has a surplus of about $54,000 for next year. The major items in terms of the revenue, real estate taxes, which is our largest revenue item, is projected to come in at 98% of the amounts levied. That's the number we've used for the past couple of years. We come in at that or a little bit better than that. The real estate taxes, as Gary mentioned, for the debt service fund, the taxes are going down as well as the expenditures are going down because the working cash bonds have been paid off. One of the biggest items here are the tax refunds. For the past couple of years, we've budgeted that at $850,000. As I mentioned earlier in my report this year, our tax refunds have run about $12,000. So we're going to have a significant surplus this year based on the fact that we aren't going to have that money coming out of our revenue.
And our lawyers looked at it and told us this is okay.
I've talked to them. They gave me an analysis that there's about $1.5 million of exposure out there. The reason that we haven't had any kind of property tax appeals coming through this year is just because the Property Tax Appeal Board is just moving very slowly. The $1.5 million includes property tax appeals for 2011, 2012, which they don't think that the appeal board will get to in the next year to 2 years. The other items that are really big items is there's 2 property tax appeals from the North Riverside Park and Wall, one for 2009 and one for 2009, one for 2010. Those both run about $450,000. They don't feel that those appeals are going to be approved because they feel that the assessed value for that property is actually higher than what the Board of Review has. So in discussions with them, looking at the open appeals, they felt that reducing our tax refund budget from $850,000 down to about $425,000, literally cutting it in half, was appropriate and made sense. This is also an item that when we budgeted it last year, there were some questions from the board in terms of why we were budgeting it so high in comparison to the appeals we had in 2013. So we've tried to bring it down to a number that we think is going to be more realistic in terms of what we're going to have to pay out next year. One of the items that has changed in the budget is in the past we budgeted tuition for all the summer programs into all the different accounts. It's very difficult to budget it that way because when you talk about these summer camps, you have revenue and expenditures that are going over 2 fiscal years. And realistically, when we're doing the budget, we're not even sure, what camps are going to take place, that type of thing. It's easier just to put that into one account and say that tuition from summer camps is going to be about $100,000. That's what it's run for the last few years, instead of trying to separate it out into all these individual accounts and having some be way over budget and some be way under budget. It just doesn't make any sense. Food service, as you just approved the agreement with District 94, that will add about $100,000 in sales next year that we have on our food service program. That's included in the revenue. It will also increase the commissions that we receive from Quest on the sales that we have to both District 94 and 95. We've separated that out into some separate accounts, just so you can see what's coming in from the districts and what the commissions are that we're receiving based on the sales here at RB. In addition to that, the commission percentage is going from 7% this year to 8% next year. So we expect to see an increase of about $15,000 in those commissions for next year, based on those two factors, the increase in the percentage as well as the addition of District 94. General state aid and state reimbursements, we'll get a clearer picture over the next month in terms of exactly what amounts we're going to be getting from the state, at least in the general state aid area. What I've done there is I've taken the amounts that we received this year, which have been prorated, and basically carried those over into next year. So one of the things in the general state aid, the budget this year was $820,000. We're only going to receive $738,000 because the state prorated the amount after we had set the budget. What I've done is I've kept that at the $738,000 for next year, and I think those are pretty good numbers based on the budget that the state passed back at the end of May. They really didn't have any major cuts in terms of education that they were talking about. The grant revenues that we've talked about in the past, we basically budget those at the same amounts that we received this year. Most of these grants, we haven't even received what our allocations are going to be next year. So if those amounts are going to change, if we get additional information, we make those changes. It's going to increase the revenue, but it's also going to increase the expenditures. It's just going to be a wash. One of the bigger items is state reimbursement for transportation. One of the things that the state did this year is they cut out the fourth payment. So we receive generally 4 equal payments of about $40,000 is what we had budgeted for this year in transportation reimbursement. That was what we were entitled to based on the transportation claim that we filed. They paid us the $160,000, but they've cut that fourth payment and said they're not going to even make the payment even into July of next year. So I've reduced that revenue by $40,000 for next year to reflect that. And then the other major item, as I mentioned, is the $6.5 million that is revenue in the capital projects fund that's coming out of the working cash.
Why did you pick $6.5 million?
I talked to our architect and I asked for a breakdown of what they felt our expenditures were going to be next year, and they gave me that breakdown based on some of the projects that we've talked to them about.
Can you include the breakdown and the direct budget numbers you give us for
Yes,
next month?
on the
221,
It's in here already?
there's a breakdown
I missed it.
Yeah, it's on
of
the
the different
expenditure.
projects.
page 221 under expenditures.
Okay.
It's broken down by stadium track, demolition, roofs, bike path, professional services.
Yeah, that was in addition to what the architect gave us. We also added $35,000 for the bike path, so we've budgeted to take that money out of working cash and put it in capital projects for that.
220.
221 is our new, the page in the,
Oh, it's in the new one.
so that would be 211, 210?
I never update the new one.
210 old?
So this, the packet you sent out, it wasn't included in, right, the one that I read?
No,
This
it
is-
was there. It was
there.
there. It was on
There when we
210.
had the meeting.
Oh, okay.
We talked about
The
I'll
money
take a
from
look
the grant, where is the money from the grant, though?
Which grant?
The, $8 million?
He covered that already. He's got it in working cash, and then he put 6.5 into Fund 20.
What we did is when
Oh,
we
I did
received
see
the
Fund
8.9
60.
million, we put it in working cash because that gives us flexibility in terms of where we want to move it.
Okay,
What
so.
we're doing now is we're budgeting to say,
Okay.
we're gonna take 6.5 million of that, move it into capital projects to cover these various items.
Okay.
I hold. The other thing is, Tim, on your assumptions, you said about something keeping the grants the same, and then you have another line that says you increased the grant. You said something about
Decreased?
increased. One line you say, grant revenues budget 2014, grant amounts, and then the,
State vocational,
there's another one that said,
I'm sorry.
the third line from the bottom, other state revenue operations and maintenance includes a
Oh.
security grant of 11.
Okay, I guess when I talk about the budgeting the grants, at the same amounts, I'm talking about the Title I, Title II grants, the federal and state grants that we get. This other grant that I have here on the third line from the bottom, the security grant, that's the one we talked about earlier, that we've been awarded $11,000 to do the work on the entrance doors. And that money was added into the revenue under the operation, so that was, I guess,
Okay,
that is a grant where we know exactly what we're going to be getting.
Expenditures?
On the expenditures, we have some fairly significant increase in software expenditures. That's due to the new math textbook software and the learning management system, as well as an upgrade of our software in our world language lab. That increased from $38,000 to $103,000. Textbook expenditures are increasing from $30,000 to $94,000, and that's based on the textbook adoptions that you've approved earlier in math, English, social science, and world language.
We'll get some of that back for math, correct?
Yes.
Do we see that in the revenues? I don't remember seeing that in your revenue expenditure money, because the math textbooks were gonna be,
9,000 or something.
Yeah, there was a student fee that was added. There's a new account on the
student
revenue
fees
side for
include a new account for new math
$8,900,
workbooks,
right.
which total $8,900.
Yeah, it's there.
It is the fifth line down.
Okay.
okay, so,
Certified staff increased by 4.5 FTEs. Certified salaries, other than for administrators, were frozen for next year based on the contract. We increased one administrative staff with a new dean of students position. I'm just kind of highlighting the more significant items. In stipends, what we've done in the past is when teachers worked on various clubs, those stipends were put into their department. So if you were an English teacher and you were a sponsor for a club, the stipend for that club was put into the English department, which doesn't make any sense to me. So the stipends that we've left in the different departments are the stipends for the new instructional coaches for next year. There are separate line items that are set up for music, orchestras, some of those items, but anything where there wasn't a separate line item for a stipend, we've combined into what the line item called organizational stipends. And so that reflects a fairly significant increase, but that's just really trying to move those stipends out of those, different departments where they really don't belong. Also have testing expenditures increasing by $40,000 to $40,000. I think that's going to be covered in a little bit with regard to this new ECRA consulting contract. Expenditures of $49,000 are included for the new band uniforms. Special education tuition expenditures, a big increase there. We have about $400,000 this year based on some of the incoming students and that we have for next year. We're budgeting $989,000, so it's a huge increase that reflects increases in students that are placed out of district. One of the things that the board wanted to look at last year was the budget for administrative expenditures. As you're all aware, there's limitations in terms of how much expenditures can go up for for the administrative expenditures, which is actually just the superintendent's office and my office. It can't go up by more than 5%, and it's not going to go up by more than 5%.
So we did cut some accounts
Yes.
to adjust for my new contract, and so if somebody asks, should ask them.
And these expenditures also include the additional $100,000 for the food service program. Again, we've added $100,000 on the revenue side and had $100,000 on the expenditure side to cover District 94. We have capital and non-capital equipment in the tech department that's increasing by $96,000. That's the one-to-one program, as well as related infrastructure improvements.
The one line, and I know you're doing the big ones, but it
Yeah.
struck me something that I don't know that was explained before. We get a commission on the food service that we sell, but now we're gonna spend $8,000 on equipment to facilitate that. Are we keeping track of expenditures of capital and expenses, and what, I mean, when you see that we are getting a commission of $15,000, that seems good, but then when I see we're spending $8,000 on some, I assume there's some other O&M costs too. What do we really, make on the commission if we're spending a lot of money? And again, we've talked about this before. Quest makes money on it. They give us a commission, but we put all the capital and O&M into them being able to provide this food service to the
So
other schools.
the
right?
commission you'll see this year, I mean, we're adding another piece of equipment for picking up the schools plus servicing our own students. But, so that will eat up a portion of the commission from adding District 94 this year, but then next year that will all be revenue.
Okay.
And we
Yeah,
have been,
this past year-
right,
This past year, we haven't had any expenditures for any
95.
kind of equipment or supplies or anything like that that's increased because of the addition of District 95. So I think this is a one-time thing that we're not gonna see again.
Don't we pay for all the supplies in the cafeteria, the paper supplies and all that? Quest doesn't pay for that, do they?
Yeah,
but
yeah.
They pay
Well,
for the paper supplies?
they play for the cups and the food boats and that stuff. We don't pay for any of
Oh,
that.
okay. Oh, I thought we had to pay for
No.
that. Okay.
Okay, Tim.
There's also another special ed tuition account that comes a little bit later in the budget. There's two of them that are set up, basically, that's according to the Illinois Program Accounting Manual. The first account, which is seeing that big increase, is where we're outplacing students into, out-of-district placements that are other than,
District provided.
other than district provided, right there. When we're placing them at other governmental units, like last year, we had a couple of students that we placed at other school districts. That expenditure is coming way down from 200,000 to about 35,000. Our LADSI expenditures are going from 319 to 391. That's based on some personnel increases that we're making there.
Also, there's some slight increases due to District 86 pulling out.
We talked about that we keep being told there wouldn't be much of a significant change. That's a 25% increase, isn't it?
Well, we had an increase to speech, and we're hiring another teacher.
Yeah,
Okay.
So that's 50,000 just for the teacher.
in the operations and maintenance area, we decreased those capital expenditures from 200,000 down to 61,000. That's to cover that safety grant as well as some work on the roofs. Transportation expenditures. We have all these different accounts in the transportation for all the different sports, all the different clubs, that type of thing. And the way money gets charged into that is if you are coach for a particular sport and you take a minibus and you get into the bus and there's no gas, you have to go to the gas station, fill it up, and then that gets charged to your budget. If you happen to hit it when it's full, then there's no charge. So it's really silly to try and budget all these different accounts for all these different activities. There's probably 30 or 40 of them, when there's no way of knowing exactly what it's going to be. So you're really looking at it more on an overall basis. How much are we going to spend overall, on that expense for all the different transportation that we're going to have? So we've kind of consolidated that into one account. Transportation expenditures have increased fairly significantly, which is unfortunate because we're seeing the decrease, in the reimbursements that are coming from the state. And the other major thing is the debt service expenditures, which we talked about before. We're seeing the revenue decrease, but also the expenditures decrease primarily due to the payoff of the working cash bonds. And then the capital projects, as we just talked about recently, there's a little over $6.5 million budgeted there for various items, and it's detailed. When we get into these projects, we'll create more detailed spreadsheets and maybe add some accounts so that we can keep a better accounting for these projects as we go into them than we had in the last year. But those are the major items. I don't know if there's any specific questions.
But
One of the smaller major items was our approval of band uniforms this year. And we had some significant discussion in that it lasted more than a minute and a half, that we're somehow going to keep track of money we collect so that we can see that the band uniforms would self-replenish themselves after a period of time. And when you decide how we're going to do that, if it's going to be an activity account, you'll bring that to the board and we'll set that up, or
Yes, we'll set up a separate activity account just for band uniforms. That'll be used for anything else.
Personally, I think we should reconsider. We had a discussion, not a vote. We don't keep track of how much we spend on football uniforms or anything else. We decided we were going to buy them. We decided we're going to charge them an activity fee like everything else. You know, we made a decision. Why go through all the effort for one organization, for one set of uniforms to track the, you know, whether we took in enough in the activity fees? I mean, if we're going to do that, we should do it for football, we should do it for swimming and everybody else, and say, you know, you bill them. We decided we weren't going to bill anybody based on the, you know, the actual cost. We were going to do it based on their participation in the activity. And in my mind, keeping track of band uniforms is just a lot of extra work that provides no benefit to us.
I thought I appreciate that, but I thought the only reason we were putting it into an activity account was so to build, just to build a dollar amount so that when it was time to buy them in 10 or 12 years, we would just go right to that account, clear it out, pay for the new band uniforms.
My point is, why don't we do that for football uniforms? And if they don't have enough money for football uniforms, we won't buy football uniforms or track uniforms.
Excuse me.
Okay, I understand what you're saying.
I'm saying, why?
But that's what we talked about when we started talking about that we want to have this self-funding mechanism that is going to be able to, in 10, 12 years, not have them come before the board, be able to say, hey, guess what? We have enough money, we need to replace it. Is it that big of an effort for you to pull the $50 out of the $75 out to per band member to keep it into a fund?
Put it into a separate activity fund?
Yeah.
No.
But when did we agree to pull 50 out of 75? And if we're going to do it for that, so we don't have the same discussion for football uniforms and for other uniforms, then we should be consistent.
Well, there's a difference because it's like a once every decade purchase. You know, it's not football uniforms, they're more routine.
Exactly. We'd probably pay more money for football uniforms if you add them up on a more constant basis, and helmets and the repair of the helmets and all the other things we do. I mean, we had a discussion whether it was necessary replacement, whether there was value to do it. And then we said, yes, there is, but you know what? Other activities and sports, people pay to participate. Why don't we pay to participate? Some people did say, let's keep track for the next time. Well, we're almost shooting ourselves a future board in the foot probably, because you know what happens if 12 years from now we collected $43,000 and the new ones are $57,000 and people want to have a discussion, and the whole time we didn't do it for any other activity. We just decided whether we're going to spend the money in the budget, and we moved forward and did it. So again, you want to do it, that's your choice, but I'm just saying I think it's extra effort, it's not really necessary, and it's treating, you know, it's taking this one type of expenditure we have and treating it different than every other kind of expenditure we have for where the school pays for, you know, uniforms or supplies for a team.
We don't, when we collect the $174,000 like Art touched on tonight for the athletics, that goes into our general revenue account, correct? And then based on his budget request sheets, and he breaks down who gets what for supplies, how much is spent on who needs what in uniforms, correct?
Yes.
So I don't think as much as we're discussing, I don't think there was any negative intent there. I think it was just
No.
the intent of, hey, let's keep track, because there was never any budgeted for the band uniforms.
Right.
And when they first came, they were talking about us just giving a donation and then trying to fundraise, and we said, let's front the money, let's charge a fee, keep collecting the fee. So let Tim and I revisit that, and we can report out to the board in
And
July.
as I recall, we didn't make any decision as
Right.
to what the mechanism would be that we would
Right.
try to
Monitor.
make sure that we collected money to replenish
Well, just
them.
like Art puts in
Right.
his chart of how many kids played tennis and paid the fee, and we could do the same with band, at least, yeah.
But from my recollection as a board, we did spend a lot of time at this table talking about how we're gonna make sure we have money for the next time the board is gonna buy these uniforms. And-
I didn't say
and
we,
if-
I acknowledge we discussed
And
it.
if they recommend one way or the other, they're gonna come to the board with
That's
that
fine.
recommendation.
I agree.
If they do make a recommendation to set up some activity account, it has to come through the board anyway.
Right.
So I was just saying that we had this discussion, not unlike the discussion we had just now,
Right.
as to what's the best way to go. But that is something we discussed, is if we're gonna spend the $50,000 up front today, how can we make sure we have money in the future when this has to happen again?
All right, so Tim, any other thing you want to talk about the budget with him?
No, I tried to cover the high points, and if there's something.
All right, so
What
we
about the
just
low
received the
points?
budget. We just received the budget tonight, am I right? This is the first?
Yes.
So how does the board feel in July? Let's review it and then we'll come back with questions.
Well, let's just a clarification. Before the July meeting, we should get a revised one with the actuals to June 30th and comparing the actual to the budget like we did last year, right?
I think last year you received it in August. It kind of all depends on when we're going to get our financial statements.
Because this
for
one
June.
still just compares last year's budget to this year's budget, not
Correct,
last
because
year's.
the actual numbers are April, and that obviously didn't make any
But
sense
I
to
think
compare the
Tim,
budget to April.
Mr. Walsh is right in that we got them.
I thought
It
you
might not
guys-
have been, end of the year, but it was
We got an
up to date.
updated one.
It was either up to May, so that when they approved it in July, so that it was on display, it was close to end of the year.
Right.
And then at the September one, and the August, they got the end of the year ones, so that they approved it in September, it was all fine.
So my request would be supporting you, Matt, that we would talk about it and approve it for both, but that we get another revised with the most up-to-date actual, because the budget and actual in a lot of areas are quite a bit different.
What I also do request too is that the board review the budget. Any questions, send them in to Kevin or Mary Ann, so that we can at least have those ready to be addressed as we're reviewing.
Right, I would look through the assumptions and your questions and send them to me off of this, and then as soon as Tim gets updated numbers, we'll put that in the next board packet. We'll try to get it out with maybe the bills and minutes.
Yeah, that
That
would be
go out
good.
the week before.
We do
Okay.
that, and then make sure we have that on the budget.
If his sheets are in.
All right.
But we'll make sure that for the July meeting, you'll at least have one that will be through May or what, right, would May be?
Yeah,
Okay.